Story 1. I took the Block 7 assignment because it paid a few dollars more per hour and because I liked the idea of walking empty places at night. There's a rhythm to it, a dull comfort in counting fence posts and checking locks. The industrial district had been hollowed out for years, factories with their teeth pulled, warehouses with graffiti that looked like signatures for things that wanted no witness. On paper my route was simple: do the perimeter at the top of each hour, check the loading docks, and log any movement. The first month was routine. I learned the echo of the doors, the way the fluorescent bulbs in the alley hummed at 3 beats per second, the smell the old transformers made when the weather changed. Then, one night at 2:14 a.m., the monitor in the booth flickered and the camera feed from Dock 3 stuttered. I told myself it was old tech. I walked the perimeter anyway, the concrete cold through my boots, the bin lid squeak under the east gate like a watchful animal. When I rounded the corner, my flashlight caught a long thing on the brick wall, not a person, not wholly human. It moved right through the light like something rehearsed. The dark thickened where the beam licked the mortar. I called dispatch, but my voice sounded small in the radio. "Suspect at Dock 3, I said, because that's the language you use to make fear administrative. They told me to hold position. I held my ground as if the raw fact of my presence would be enough to anchor the world. The shadow folded against the wall and elongated, and for half a heartbeat my light revealed the suggestion of a face, too narrow, eyes too low, an angle like a cut. It did not turn and say anything. It simply tilted, as if weighing whether my small human brightness was worth its attention. Backup came, as backup always does, measured and bureaucratic, 2 uniforms and the steady squeal of a patrol vehicle. We swept the yard. The cameras had a 3-second gap in the footage, an absence that felt like a mouth left open. When the image returned, the shadow was closer to the fence, and as we approached we found a line of flat stones laid like the teeth of something that had been chewing the edge of the night. You could not call the arrangement random. Someone, or something, had placed them with a kind of patience I found difficult to name. I wrote the incident up with the tone of a professional. I circled details around the word vandalism and left lines for signatures. But the next week, at the same time on another night, a worker opening late for an emergency found the stones again, laid in a spiral around a rusted pallet. The foreman muttered superstition and jokes, younger guards shrugged it off. But I remember the cold way the fist of the night clenched around my spine then. The company moved me a month later to another site after I asked off the schedule for a week. They labeled it medical leave, which sounds better on the ledger. Years later I ran into an old maintenance man who'd worked Block 7 before I did. He told me stories like the ones night workers tell one another, not for entertainment, but because stories are the only currency we have for certain kinds of memory. We used to call them the markers, he said, like he was naming something that had existed without permission. They put down things so the night remembers. He laughed the wrong way. I left thinking about how we try to inventory the world with boxes and reports, and how some things slip between the forms. Sometimes the job teaches you to write what you can into the night and to leave the rest unspoken. I do patrols now on well-lit properties. The hum of the lights keeps the dark in tidy bands and my radio chatter fills the silence like knitting. But sometimes, when I drive by an old industrial lot, my skin remembers the transparency of the shadow on brick and I slow the car, more to see if the world is still the same than to find any proof. There are nights when I dream of standing in a line of white stones and the sense of being watched is not by a camera, but by an intention older than the ledger I kept. Story 2. The mall job was supposed to be easy, climate control, empty corridors, the hum of vac. I took the position because my hours as a night guard could be strange and steady, and because the manager paid by the hour not by the story. The anchor store where I worked the graveyard shift had been emptying for months. Mannequins stood in the display windows with their smile permanently affixed, like witnesses who had sworn to be polite and to not move. My rounds were almost religious. Pass the food court, check the elevators, sweep the dark aisles until the fluorescent rings went white. One winter night at around 1:52 a.m. the alarm in the receiving bay tripped. The door had been ajar. My flashlight snagged dust motes that seemed to move in a current, and there, in the back near a stack of pallets, were small footprints chalked into the grime. Not human boots, not animal paws, prints that looked like the soles of small shoes pressed with the flatness of someone who moves through wet clay. I called law enforcement, as we do, and we waited under the glow of emergency exit signs. The store cameras recorded a corridor of still boxes and then, for an instant, the outline of something that moved like a child but wrong in the shoulders. After the patrols left the scene, I spent the next hour cataloging what I could. A showbox that had been left open, inside a tangle of paper cutouts shaped like eyes, dozens of them and each inked with a different irises. They were meticulous, like an offering. They were positioned in a line pointing toward the mannequins in the front display. For the first few nights nothing else happened beyond the small rearrangements. A dress turned to face a particular angle, a shoe shifted 2 inches, a child scribble on a packing crate. Then the phone calls started. At first it was a click, the acoustic equivalent of breath into the receiver. Then my name, said once in a voice that was almost parenthetical. "Don't close your eyes," the voice would whisper, and the line would cut. The calls were traced back to dead numbers and disconnected lines. They left me with the sensation that telephone wires were thin threads pulled taut across unseen rooms in the night. The final incident happened when the store's temperature display flickered on the wall. It went from 68 degrees to 32 and then to blank. The fluorescent lights poured white across the mannequins and one of them had turned its head. I can still remember lining up my own marrow with the figure of plastic across from me, waiting to see if mimicry was possible. The alarm at the back door tripped again, and as I moved toward the dock door, I found a showbox placed on a pallet. Inside was a single child's shoe with a note tucked into it. The page had been folded small, the scrawl trembling, "I am watching." I quit that job a month later. The manager dumped the logs into a file and moved to improve security by adding cameras as if new lenses erase old events. The footage they handed me later had gaps and mismatches I could not explain, whole minutes where the angle jumped, frames that pixelated into vertical bands the color of ash. When I walk past the mall now at 2 a.m., sometimes the display windows show a different world, a reflection that isn't mine, or at least not entirely mine. I keep the showbox note in a drawer at home. It is absurd to keep talismans, but perhaps absurdity is another form of insurance. Story 3. The plant was paying for overnight security while upgrades ran on one side and crane operators came in on the other. They put me on roof patrol for a week because they needed someone awake who could log the comings and goings of crews after midnight. The roof is its own world, corrugated metal underfoot, industrial lights that lean like constellations, the low voice of the city circulating somewhere below. It is a place where small details become enormous by repetition, a blinking tower light, the rhythm of a truck idling, a puddle that creates an echo like someone walking out of phase with the rest of the world. One night, while I was checking the perimeter of the skylights, I noticed a procession down by the old kill, a tiny, measured parade of lights that crawled along the kill's lip in a line so regular it looked like a string of small lanterns. They moved with an equidistant patience, not like people who hurry and lag, but like beads on an invisible wire. The intercom crackled as I called the supervisor and he told me to wait for clarification. I waited. The line of lights reached the base of the kill and went out as if pulled into the earth. In the morning the maintenance crew came up with tools to trace wire damage and false fixtures. They reported nothing. There were coils of twisted metal like the remnants of Christmas lights, but the bulbs were missing, the wiring was intact, looped, but no hardware lay where we'd seen the glow. It made someone joke about a prank. A co-worker with longer tenure said nothing until the end of the day when he cornered me with a brown mug and told me to beware the kill because a boy had once walked its edge and fallen in decades ago, and his family had left offerings there. The words were half conversation and half civics pamphlet. It felt absurd until I found a child's drawing folded under a loose stone by the foundation. After that, I noticed things. Small tokens tucked near vents, a pile of cigarette butts in a neat spiral where none should have been, a low whistle in the vents at 2 a.m. that could be explained by wind if you wanted it explained. We started leaving little sweets on the kill rail because someone suggested ritual might be kindness. I scoffed at first. I'm not a superstitious man, but there is a threshold when repeated oddities become the grammar of your life. I started working with another patrol at night. The company didn't care for stories, but it did care about liability, and 2 bodies look better on a camera than one. Once, I took a recording during my watch, the hum of the roof, a far truck, and then a thin chorus like someone exhaling in unison. When I played it back in the day, the chorus was a wave of frequencies that no instrument in the plant could reproduce. A technician insisted it was interference. A retired worker smirked and told me to keep my lunch paid and my prayers private. The kill continues to be a place where work crews leave offerings and where the list of small things missing grows slowly. The clipped corner of a napkin, a child's plastic coin. I resigned months later for reasons that included pay and the comfort of known light. The roof stays in my dreams sometimes, a line of lanterns marching on a scaffold toward the unimpressed sky. Story 4. Hospitals at night feel like ships anchored in a fog of purpose. The lot behind the complex was a concrete reef of pillars and low overhead lighting where the shadows pooled. I worked nights there when my sister was recovering in a ward upstairs. The job was simple and oddly compassionate sometimes: hold weathered umbrellas in the rain, help confused visitors, keep watch for broken headlamps. People who worked there always said the building carried stories like characters in a book. The place remembers births and farewells in the same breath. One night there was a call from the ward that a child had wandered out. The report was routine until I saw the tiny jacket thrown over a stairwell railing. It was soaked, mud-hemmed, and far too small for any of the current patients. The security logs mentioned a name that corresponded with a file from a year prior, a patient who had been discharged under confusing circumstances and whose family had stopped checking in. This was the kind of detail that made grown men quiet and careful. As I checked the perimeter, the paging system in the lobby suddenly looped my name, oddly, and then a phrase that echoed through the concrete: "Stay with us." The voice came in the clipped timbre of an automated system, but the cadence was off, the kind of repetition you hear when a system is asked to do more than it was designed for. Later, reviewing the footage, the cameras showed a heat signature that moved under the stairwell like someone pacing, but the pixels collapsed sometimes into a blank where a human form should be. People working nights reported small offerings on dashboards and condensation messages scrawled in breath on glass: "Please." A nurse who had been on the floor for 20 years shrugged and said the hospital is heavy with things people bring: grief, joy, the weight of waiting. Sometimes these things took shape as a voice in the night, sometimes as a child's drawing pinned to the staff board with a scrawl that read, "I miss you." The human brain tries to arrange coincidences into cause, but when so many small, strange things accumulate, you begin to shift your behavior. Once, while doing rounds, I found a single coin resting on the cap of a lamppost, balanced so precisely I felt the arrangement was intentional. Later, when I pocketed it, the metal was cold as if it had been kept under ice. I began carrying a photograph of my sister in my wallet after that. Odd talismans get you through long nights. The newer cameras the hospital installed made the footage clearer, but the reports did not stop. The messages, the coins, and the irregular heat signatures continued on and off as if the place had a rhythm that refused to be fully explained. On a night when there were storms rolling in, as thunder asked the building to speak louder, the stairwell offered up a small chorus of sounds that matched the cadence of children playing far off and then folded quiet. A porter I trusted told me he sometimes hears footsteps in a hall that had been renovated decades ago, steps that belong to shoes with old soles. He said, "We don't chase them. We keep the doors closed and we bring a candle if we can." I left the job a few months later, not because it was dangerous but because grief and fatigue make the weight of the work heavier. I still visit my sister at the hospital, and sometimes as I walk past the lot I leave a small coin on a pillar. It feels like a very small justice.